Hi everyone, welcome back. So today we are going to look at how to do some more test-driven development. We're going to just start going through some very simple use cases, and then we're going to tackle FizzBuzz, which is a very common coding exercise for use that some actual employers enable or will give a interviewee a exercise to do FizzBuzz and see how it works, see how they do it. So what we want to do is I'm going to copy this test, I'm going to paste it here. The next one we're going to say subtracts. What do we say? 2 minus 1. All right, so we're going to create say subtract, and then we want to say 2, and we're going to subtract 1 from it, and this will equal 1. So if you subtract 2 minus 1, you get 1. So actually, if you subtract, the way you properly say it is if you subtract 1 from 2, but we're going to be 2 minus 1. So, all right, so we start with this. We run the tests. If we do npm test, as we were doing, we've got a failed test. Excellent. Well, it fails. It's saying a reference error, subtract is not defined. Well, that's because we're not importing subtract. That's because we haven't even created it yet. So let's create this first. So we can copy this, do this very quick and easy now. Change the name to subtract. It's going to have an A and B, and subtract is A minus B. So now if I go down here and hit up arrow to npm test, it's going to fail for the exact same reason, because we still have not we've exported, but we have not imported it. We are only importing add. So if we import add, some IDEs will actually automatically import, but this IDE does not. At least not with the. There might be a plugin for it, but I don't know what that is. So we type subtract there, and then we go down here, hit up arrow, npm test, and just like that, it passes. So we can also do the same thing for multiply and divide. If we want to create a function for multiply and divide, we're not really going to worry about that right now because, I mean, you know what? Let's do it. It'll take 2 seconds. So let's go ahead and copy, and then paste, and it multiplies 2 and 2. So multiply 2 times 2 to equal, I hope you know what this is, 4. All right, so now if I run the test again, we run the tests to make sure they fail. When you're doing test-driven development, it's very important that you make sure the test fails in the way that you expect it to, so multiply is not defined. In fact, if I were to then do multiply, so actually this is probably a better way to do it. So if I copy this and then paste, I call this multiply, and A and B, and this is A, and the symbol for this in code is the asterisk. So that's multiply that times that. So if I come back, but if I were to return 0, this is more of a common way of doing TDD. You have it return something you know is going to fail, but fail in the right way. Multiply. So if we do that now, and I run this test, now it fails, but it's not failing because of reference error. It's failing because it expected 4, but it got 0. Well, it got 0 because the two numbers passed into it, I didn't use either one. This is the first one, this is the second one. I instead just returned 0. So if I now do A times B, so now if I run that, make sure I save that. I think it'll probably auto-save, but npm test, now it passes. Okay, so let's do divide. So divides, that's not how you spell divides. divides 4, was it 2 from 4? 4 divided by 2. So if I do divide, and then I do 4 divided by 2 is equal to 2. So, you know, I think I want to do this a little different, just for the sake of not getting confused with the numbers. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. So now, if we run this test, we should see another failure. And I hope you know why it will fail. Because of a reference error. So reference error, divide is not defined, because we have add, subtract, multiply, but we don't have divide. So let's go over here and create divide. So copy, paste, paste. And this gives me divide and A and B. And we can return 0 again. So we get the failure. So if I save that and then go over here, we're going to make sure that we import divide. And as you can see, if I hit a comma and hit the first character, the code can recognize, this IDE can recognize what possible things I have in app that start with D. And so it will automatically, if you hit tab, it'll autocomplete for you. So now if I run the test, we should see a failure, but for the other reason. There we go. I expected 5, but got 0. So now if we go back over here, we make this pass A and divided by B. So is that right? A divided by B? Nope, that's not going to fail. That's going to fail. Watch now. So now, but the test tells me, oh no, A divided by B. Oh yeah, it was A divided by B. Yeah, the first number divided by the second number. Yep. Oh no, yeah, that's right. So all 4 pass. So this is divide this by this, and so I should have said this different. Divide 10 by 2. That's how we talk about division. All right, so now now let's look at a more interesting exercise. This is going to be FizzBuzz. Now the rules for FizzBuzz, in fact, yeah, no, we'll do this for now. FizzBuzz, 1 returns 1. So FizzBuzz is a function that if you pass any number to it, it will either return the number that you passed to it, or if it's a 3, or if it's a number divisible by 3, it will return the word fizz. If it's a number divisible by 5, it will return the word buzz. And if it's a number divisible by both 3 and 5, it will return the word FizzBuzz. And like I said, all the other numbers will return just the number that you pass. So let's start with FizzBuzz returns. So this is how we use TDD to solve a more complicated problem by breaking it down to smaller problems. So first we're going to write the FizzBuzz, function. So FizzBuzz, oops, right, and there we go. And we're going to pass a 1 to FizzBuzz. So when we pass a 1 to FizzBuzz, we expect that to equal 1. And so this is where I can, it might be helpful, I'm not sure how, just so you don't get too confused, I'm going to extract this to a variable so you can recognize that this is actually a, and we're going to call it result. So what happens is that we need FizzBuzz to actually return a number or return a value of some kind. And that value is going to be what we pass into result. And then we're expecting that result to equal 1. The same thing for all of these. I didn't do this, but I could have. And that might help make that clearer and more for those of you who are new to how code works and what a function is. So with this, if I run the tests, we expect when we pass 1 to FizzBuzz, it returns 1. So why do you think it failed? What do you think the failing message is? It is a reference error because we have not created FizzBuzz, the function. We're just calling it, and we have not imported it. So let's go over here. Let's create a function. I'm just going to copy and paste. And then I'm going to export function, and we're going to call this one FizzBuzz. and we're only going to pass one number into it, so one parameter. So now we're going to start by returning 0, just because it is good to get a test that fails to start with, so you can know that when your test passes, it passes for the right reasons because your code is actually correct. So let's, if I run this, npm test, it fails. Did it fail for the right reason? It did not. It's still reference error because we've not imported it. So we need to import FizzBuzz. Okay, so now if we save that and run this again, now it failed for the right reason. We expected it to give us 1 back, but it gave us 0 back. So now we can simply make this test pass in the simplest way we know how, by just returning 1. We could do it other ways, but for now we want to just make it very simple. We want to only write code that the tests make us to write. So npm test, and ta-da, it passed. All right, so now we know that we can't just have it return a hard-coded 1. This is what they call hard coding. We don't care what the variable is, what's passed in, we're just returning 1 no matter what. So the next thing we want to do is write another test. So FizzBuzz 2 returns 2. So now FizzBuzz 2 here, and this returns 2. So now we can no longer, so now if we run the test, we see, well, that fails because we can't hard code it anymore. Well, how would we do this? So the number we're passing in is the number we want coming back to us. That we pass a 1 here, we want to get a 1 back. If we pass a 2 here, we want to get 2 back. So how would we do that? Well, what we want to do is then just return A, because this is what's being passed in. We're just returning the number that's passed in to us. So let's go ahead and save that and then run this, see if that works. And that works. So we've got both tests passing. Okay, so let's write another test. So FizzBuzz 3, well, this isn't going to return 3 because of the rules of FizzBuzz. We want this to return Fizz. So this is where it gets interesting. And we want to return the string Fizz. Remember, words have to be recognized as strings. Otherwise, the code thinks they're variables. If I were just to write Fizz in here, it would give you an error. Let's see what that does, what that looks like. It says Fizz is not defined. Well, Fizz is not defined means that it thinks that there's a variable named Fizz that you're referencing, but you haven't actually done a const Fizz equals anything. So it's not actually it's not a valid one. So instead, I will surround that with quotes. And now if I run the test, it fails and it says expected Fizz, but received 3. Why did we receive 3? Well, because over here, we're still returning A. So now what we want to do is, this is where we want to say, how do we want to say if a number is, so what we need now is an if statement. So we want to say if A, and this to say equals is triple equals 3. If A equals 3, then return the word Fizz. So this is a simple way of doing this. It will, again, only work for this scenario, but it will cause the tests to pass. So let's go ahead and do that. npm test. There it is. We just passed that test. So now this is not sufficient, because what if it's 6? So let's go ahead and skip on. Well, actually, yeah, let's do the use case of 3, and so it means we'll skip to 6. We're going to skip past 5 for the moment, because that'll be a different bit of code to make that pass. And we're not quite finished with this, because this is not going to work with any multiple of 3. It will only work with the number 3. So at this point now, because we want it to be whether it's any multiple of 3, so 3, 6, 9, 12, and so on. So we want it to return Fizz also if it's a FizzBuzz 6. So now if we run the test, we'll see that our hard coding 3 is not going to work, because when it gets to 6, it's returning 6 instead of fizz. So this is where we have to be introduced to the concept of a modulo or modulus. So if we go to a browser, so question is, what is a modulo? What is a modula? So JavaScript modulo, modulus. Modulo or modulus is kind of the same. So also called a remainder here. It's this percent symbol. So this says if we do 13% 5, so the remainder operator returns the remainder left over when one operand is divided by a second operand. It always takes the sign of the dividend. So in other words, we take 13 with 5, the output is 3 because 5 goes into 13 twice, and 2 times 5 is 10, and the remainder is 3. Negative 13 divided by 5, or modulo 5, is a negative 3. 4 modulo 2, because 2 times 2 equals 4, this will equal 0. And if you have a negative, it's a negative 0. So this is kind of the way that the modulo works. And there's other, if you want to look at other examples, the Free Code Camp has also got a good explanation for how a modulo works. We have this n equals 7. If n modulo 2 equals 0, then log is even, else is odd, because every number divided by 2 is even, right? So 7 is definitely odd. If you pass an 8, it would be even, and so on and so forth. So this is the way we can actually say, okay, wait. So if we want to check a number, we can say if n is a multiple of 2, if that's true, then this will be equal to 0. So now we can know with this code right here. So let's look at this code right here, and let's just play with something. Actually, before we go any further, let's just copy this right here. We don't have to do that. We're not going to do that. We're just we understand the concept. So let's go into here for a moment, and this is where some things get interesting. Where there's a tool called a REPL. Stands for REPL. It's an acronym that stands Read, Edit, Print, Loop. And so the way to get into the node REPL, what this does is helps us give us quick feedback, so we can play with code to figure out how something works. So let's say if I do 2 modulo 2, oops, that's not a modulo. 2 modulo, oops, hit it again. 2. And if you can see down there, it already says 2, or it says 0. Okay, so that's because 2. So the bigger number has to come first. So if I do 2 modulo 4, it has a remainder of 2, because now we're going the wrong direction, right? So it's not as helpful. What we want to do is we want to do 4 modulo 2. And that, if you see down here, and if you hit enter, it will show that that's printed out. But so what we want to say is, what about 5 modulo 2? I expect that to be 1. Yep, and that's 1. So, okay, let's say we have so we want to figure out 3. So we want to say is 3. What if we do 3 modulo 3? Modulo 3. What does that equal? Well, that equals 0. Okay, what if we do 6 modulo 3? That's darn it. I keep on missing the. For some reason, I can't find that key. Also a 0. So 6 modulo 3 and 3 modulo 3 also equals 0. What about 1 modulo 3? Equals 1. What about 2 modulo 3? That's 2. All right, that's cool. All right, so now if it returns, if it's a multiple of this, it will return 0. If it's not a multiple, if it's a multiple of 3, it will return 0. If it's not a multiple of 3, it will not return 0. So if we take that information here, then we can say, okay, so A modulo, oops, hope you're getting better luck at typing than I am. Modulo 3, if that's the case, then this should be equal to 0. So because we see 3 modulo 3 is 0 and 6 modulo 3 is 0. So, okay, so a modulo 3 is 0. So if we run that, does that get both tests to pass? So to exit out of here, you can do Control-C twice, type .exit, which is what I prefer, because it feels like I'm actually exiting. So now I'm there. So now if I go in here and I do npm test, there it is, it passed. Okay, so now we figured out how to do multiples. So now let's go back. We've got another test to write. So if I do Command VV, and so now let's do 5. Returns buzz. So oops. All right, so buzz. So if we pass a 5 to this, return the word buzz. Okay, let's run the tests. npm test. So we did not get buzz. Instead, we got the number 5. So we now need to do something very similar to what we've done here. So I'm going to copy this just for the sake of not making a syntax error. And I'm going to replace the 3 with a 5. Now I'm going to replace this fizz with buzz. So now we have a modulo of 5. If it's a number divisible by 5 with a 0 remainder, then it's going to give a buzz. So let's see. And we passed. So that is the first 2 steps of FizzBuzz. Now the last one is if it has both divisible by both 5 and 3, then we do FizzBuzz. Return the word FizzBuzz. So okay, so let's go ahead and copy this, and FizzBuzz, we're going to pass 15 because 15 is the first number that's divisible by both 5 and 3. So if we pass 15, we expect this to return FizzBuzz. So this is going to return FizzBuzz. All right. So now, if we save that, and we save this, and we run the test, we get a failed test. And the failed test is failing because we expected FizzBuzz, but instead we just got fizz. Now, why did we get fizz instead of buzz? Well, let's see what happens here. When this 15 came into here, it said, is 15 divisible by 3 if with no remainder? If it was, we return fizz and we don't do anything else. That's why we're not returning the number every single time and returning buzz every single time, because we don't go to this code at all. So the problem is that if we did another modulo down below, it's not going to help us. We have to put a modulo above. So if, and this is where we want to say a modulo, we could do a modulo 3 triple equals 0, and we could use an and, 2 ampersands. Oh no, it would be or. No, and. It would have to be both that and a modulo 5 triple equals 0. So this is a statement. So if we put this in parentheses, and this in parentheses, now we have 2 if statements. This 2 Boolean checks. This is checking that a ampersand 3 triple equals 0, as well as it's divisible by 5. So it says this is divisible by 3 and divisible by 5. Then it's both. Then we can return FizzBuzz. So let's see if this works. npm test. It passes the tests. All right, so now we have a system where we're at the step, we've got the FizzBuzz working. The question now is, can we do this in a way that doesn't look so messy? This is kind of hard to look at. Now that we've just learned what modulo is, it's really complicated, and 2 ampersands with an and. If this is true and this is true, then this whole thing is true. But what we want to do is something, so a simpler way to do this, if a number is divisible by 3 and by 5, that means that it's always divisible by 3 times 5, which would be 15. So we can make this simpler by just doing 15 and take this out. So now it's a little easier to look at, and if I save this, it'll actually automatically take out those parentheses because they were unnecessary, the second set of parentheses, because of my prettier plugin. So, or extension, I call it. So now we've got this a little bit cleaner looking. So we're saying if A is divisible by 3 and 5, which is 15, we do FizzBuzz. So now let's run the test and see if it still works. It does. And that's FizzBuzz. So you can play around with this, write more tests if you want, just to check things out, just to see if you do 30 or if you do 45 or if you do 40 or 20, 21. See that you get what you expect to get. So, and that's it for today. Thank you for watching.